Hello everyone. First, I'd like to thank you for being here today with us. And my name is Natalia Batista, and I'm one of the IWS Toronto co-leaders. And we, IWS Network, we are very excited to have you here with us tonight to talk about biotech trends and must-have skills for career success. So while we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to enhance our own understanding of local indigenous people and their cultures. So from coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and how each of us in our own way can try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you. So our agenda for today includes a brief introduction on our IWS network. And after, our speaker will tell us about the adMare Bioinnovation Program. And then we have our speaker session. And after that, we open the floor for the general public for questions. And we'd like to remind you that in the end, we will have the breakout rooms that we have designated for this meeting, in which we have the opportunity to network with the speaker, our IWS leaders, and also with other attendees. So now I'd like to introduce you the Networking International and Immigrant Women in Science. And so IWS has started in 2018, and we have leaders from all over Canada. And our mission is to build a collaborative network that supports and promotes equity, diversity, and inclusion of immigrant and international women from STEM backgrounds here in Canada. And our vision is to share career, gender, and multicultural challenges while discussing possible solutions in a safe and friendly environment. And it's also to provide network and professional opportunities and to offer mentorships from IWS senior leaders sharing professional experiences. And if you want to have more information about us, please visit our webpage, iwsnetwork.ca, where you have all the information about our events, our programs, and our teams. And we are very active on the social media, so please feel free to follow us and contact us on our social networks. And Slack is our main networking platform, where we hope all the members across Canada can connect. And we are very happy and excited to share with you our partnership with IEC-BC. And we are together in this Skills Passport for Newcomers in Tech program, or SPRINT. And this is a national program founded by the Government of Canada's Foreign Credential Recognition Program to accelerate labor market integration of skilled immigrants in information and communication technology, or biotechnology and life science. So if you want to know more about this program, please go to our webpage, iwsnetwork.ca/sprint. And some of our housekeeping items for our webinar today. So please mute yourself if you're not talking. Video on is great, but it's okay if you prefer not to. And feel free to tweet live about this event, tagging IWS Network. And also know that this meeting will be recorded and screen snapshots will be taken. So now I'll give the floor to Neeraja, another IWS co-leader, to introduce our moderators for tonight and our speaker that we have for our discussion. So please, Neeraja.
Thank you, Natalia, for setting the stage for us. Good evening, everyone. I'm Neeraja, IWS City Leader for Toronto Chapter and Agribusiness Marketer by profession. Welcome you again to the event. Before I introduce our expert today, I would like to take a moment to introduce my fellow organizers for this event. Natalia Batista, whom you heard before, is the co-chair of the Marketing and Communication Committee at IWS Network. She is a research scientist with PhD and postdoc in immunology. Maria Zavala, co-chair of Treasure Committee and holds masters in engineering management and a master's in business administration. She specializes in data management and in business analytics field. Last not the least, Dr. Anjana Govindaranjan is a co-chair of fundraising committee at IWS Network. She has done her PhD and postdoc in plant biotechnology and pursuing her career in the same field. Billions of dollars of new investment has been pouring into Canadian biotech and life sciences. With late investments flowing, the missing link isn't money, but talent. Thus, to fit in the competitive market, let's learn from our experts on how to identify the role and skills that offer professional competitiveness. It's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Edie Dullaghan, Scientific Director at adMare Academy. She plays a direct role in development and advancement of scientific talent within the Canadian life science ecosystem. At adMare, Dr. Dullaghan supports the academics program, including the Bioinnovation Scientific Program, a one-of-a-kind program for early career scientists looking to build drug development and commercialization career in Canadian life science industry. She has obtained her PhD in UK at the National Institute of Medical Research, studying the molecular genetics of SOS response in Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the causative agent of TB. Today, we encourage you to submit your questions via chat box to get them answered during our Q&A session. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Edie.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully that all works. I'm going to give myself a pointer. I have a laser pointer now. That's wonderful. Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me. It's my privilege and pleasure to be here with you tonight. Although on the West Coast, it's late afternoon. So yeah, I am Dr. Edie Dullaghan. I'm the Scientific Program Director of the Bioinnovation Scientist Program that has been developed by adMare. The way I'm going to speak today, and feel free if anyone ever needs to interrupt and ask a question, this can be a conversation. It doesn't have to be too formal. But what I'd like to do is introduce you to my story, where I came from, also what adMare's story. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had gone on mute, but thank you again for that wonderful introduction. So today I'm going to talk to you about my story. I'm going to talk to you about adMare's story, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the current trends in biotech that maybe will help you to be aware of how you can develop your career here in Canada. I'm trying to advance my slide. Okay. I was born in Dublin, Ireland, and like many Irish families, we moved to England so that my parents could access work. And it's worth noting that this was at a time when relationships between Britain and Ireland were actually quite difficult. And it was a hard time for my parents, but they knew that making that move with their small children would give us opportunities that would not be available to us in Ireland. And so I fully understand that movement from your home to another country can be for many, many reasons, and it can be quite hard. As far as college life went, I was actually the first person in my family to go to college. Typically, you know, they had just worked hard and finished high school and that was it, then you went out to work. I was very, very fortunate that I had an opportunity to apply for a bachelor's in applied biology. I had a love of science, and it's kind of funny that at the time that I did this, I expected that I would become a teacher. I never expected that I would find that I had the skills to be a scientist, and also was never really encouraged down that direction. But as you can see that I say here, the life-changing selection of a co-op program. So when I went to college, one of the things, because I had done a lot of other jobs, my personal tutor had said, oh, you don't need to do a co-op program. We think you have enough skills to not do that. And I said, oh, okay, then I won't do the co-op 8 months. And it was kind of interesting that serendipitously, they called me before going into my final year. They had a need for someone at the National Institute for Medical Research. And I said, sure, I will take it. And it's kind of interesting, and I've said it to so many students that I speak to. If you're doing a bachelor's and you have any interest in ending up in a biotech situation or even an academic situation, those co-ops are worth their weight in gold, because that's when you actually get an opportunity to sit at the bench and do experiments and find out if you can't stand it or if it's something you want to do. And I remember very quickly realizing that a light went on for me. And I started out working with Plasmodium falciparum, the causative agent of cerebral malaria. And very quickly, I didn't even want to go home at night. I wanted to run my experiments. I wanted to stay there. And I knew then that I was not going to be a teacher. I was going to be at the bench and be a scientist. And so from there, I actually went on to do my PhD in the Mycobacterium tuberculosis field. And here is another thing where you learn networking. I also did my PhD in the same institute. And that institute took 17 students a year, predominantly from very high-end institutions, not the kind of local university that I went to. But during my time as a co-op student, I got to know people and I networked with them, and I was in the infectious diseases space. And suddenly then when I'm applying to be a grad student, people have heard of me, they know my name. And that's where I believe networking made a huge difference in my life and where I eventually ended up. And so my last move was to Canada quite a long time ago, 22 years, as a postdoctoral fellow. And so I have done that move from academics to biotechnology, and finally to adMare Bioinnovations. And I'm actually now the longest serving employee of adMare, having served there for over 14 years. So I don't know how many of you know about adMare, what we do, who we are. And so I'd just like to give you a little bit of an introduction as to what our goals are. We are a not-for-profit, we are federally funded, and our goal is to build Canada's life sciences industry from sea to sea. And there's 3 ways that we do this. We build companies by partnering with and investing in technology innovators and entrepreneurs. We have a team that scouts through universities looking for opportunities to take great academic research and build on it, bring it into our labs, validate the science, put some money into it and create really fantastic companies. And I could give you quite a list of companies that we've done that for. The other thing that we do is we build ecosystems, and we currently have 2 major ones. We have an innovation center in Montreal, and we have one in Vancouver. And the word for us right now is we are looking that our 3rd one is likely to be in Toronto. So that would give us 3 really active centers, which is very exciting. The part of it that I'm now interested in, and I spent most of my years at adMare doing the science, the part that I'm most interested in now is the building of talent for the next generation of highly qualified scientists in Canada. We know that pretty much the growth of the industry from these companies here, the pain point that they feel is accessing scientists that are job ready, that can actually move across from their PhD or postdoc programs and actually contribute in a meaningful and valuable way to the development of whatever that company is trying to do. One of the ways in which we are building talent is through the adMare Academy. And so I'm just going to talk to you about 4 pillars here, but really and truthfully, my main discussion in this next portion is about the Bioinnovation Scientist Program. Firstly, though, I will mention we have an undergraduate institute, and that really is our co-op program. It is highly competitive to get into it, because I think now many young people realize that if they want to get into a biotech position, the best thing they can do is get themselves some hands-on education at the bench. And our co-ops undergo 8 months of really intense training in this situation. One of the other programs we have is our postdoctoral program. This is a 2-year research intensive fellowship for recent PhD. It's done in an industrial level. Typically, our postdocs will manage a program with one of the small companies that we are involved with. And it gives them that experience of what it takes to develop a program in a biotech situation. It's very different than being in an academic situation where you have a project that you work with on your own. Once you're in a biotech field, you become part of a team. And so now you have to learn different skills. And I will say that we took this program into consideration when we started to curate and build the Bioinnovation Scientist Program. We really built it around what we'd learned from our postdocs. And I will just mention that we also have an executive institute. This is a 10-month intensive designed for those that now are really accessing some of the more senior C-suite positions. And but that institute only takes 20 attendees a year. So again, it's quite competitive to actually access that too. So the Bioinnovation Scientist Program is very much aligned with our mandate to help existing companies to scale up, to drive the growth of those companies into Canadian anchors. And I don't think I ever really understood that Canada actually doesn't have anchor companies in drug development. We have the Mercks, we talk about the GSKs and the Pfizers, but they're not Canadian born, if you like. And what we're hoping to do is change that. Canada has some of the greatest researchers in the world. And so what we'd like to see is that we develop Canadian companies that become real anchors in our ecosystem. Like I said before, the program itself builds on the postdoctoral program. And what I did for many months is I interviewed previous postdocs with adMare. What was it that helped them? What could we have done better? Did it make a difference in their careers having done their postdoc with us? And I have a slide a little further down that will show you just how well our postdocs have gone on to do. The program has 3 levels. Each level has its own learning objective, and that is it aims to meet that overarching objective to broaden your perspective, your network, and those crossover skills that you need, that a junior scientist needs to accelerate the flow of life science technologies to market in the Canadian ecosystem. And this is what it looks. This is what it actually looks like. we built the program around all these project management, interpersonal skills, general management, how to understand your project environment, and understanding standards and regulations. This is what the modules look like. So we have those foundational skills, which I can tell you are more of the soft skills that you need to develop. And I know, having done a PhD myself, during that period, no one spoke to me about how do I learn critical thinking? How do I learn to become more assertive, especially when I have a point of view that I think is important? Project management, how do I learn that skill of managing a large international program? And so we focused on that for the foundational skills. And then, of course, you have to learn those soft skills, those collaborative innovation skills. That is, how do you advance your career? How do you manage conflict? And I can tell you that anyone that's ever worked in a team is going to have to learn to manage conflict. It's just the way that life is. Problem solving, how to coach your team to higher performance. How do you, as a leader, enable the people that are reporting to you to develop their careers? Because that's also very important for them. But obviously, you know, if you're going to go into a biotechnology situation, you have to understand what drug development is. And so we chose several modules where we looked at drug discovery. What is drug discovery? How is it being done right now? And when we have a look at the biotech trends, you're going to see that there's quite some changes happening right now in the way drug discovery is happening, certainly in comparison to when I first worked in a drug discovery situation. Also, drug development. What is clinical development? What does it look like? What is a phase 1? What is a phase 2? What is a phase 3? What does product registration look like for a company? And then drug commercialization. And I can say in the first company I worked in, I'd never even heard of pharmacoeconomics or thought about it. And recently I was a panel on a conference where someone pointed out, there's a chap from Merck, that once you register your FDA approved drug, it can be 15 to 44 months before you see any money come into the company. And the thing is, then you start to understand how difficult it is for a small biotech to actually be successful. Knowing that and having that training actually makes you more understanding of the business side that your company is having to deal with. And all of that, I think, is very, very beneficial for them. Now, I spoke about our postdocs and where they are now. So 96% of our postdocs are now successfully employed in top life science companies, 83% of which are in Canada. Some of them are in the US, some of them are in various parts of Europe. But I can tell you, I connected with at least 20 of them, and they have gone on to tremendous careers. And I'll just point out a couple. So Simvivo, they've just gone into their phase 1 clinical trial for a COVID vaccine, and their vice president of R&D is actually an ex-postdoc of ours. And then I point out Precision Nanosystems, that is in the news all the time right now because of the LNPs that they have developed for vaccines. And their CEO actually was one of our earliest postdocs. And I could name so many of these companies and where the postdocs have actually gone. We've got a number that now that are in Zymeworks, a number that are in AbCellera. And these guys have developed really, really strong careers. I can say that every one of them that I interviewed said that they were head and shoulders above other applicants when they went to these companies looking for these positions. So I think that that really does encourage us as we develop the Bioinnovation Scientist program, that we have developed something that will aid you in your career as you move forward. One of the participants we had early on was Angela Zhao from the Precision Medicine Initiative at the U of T. And it was kind of interesting that the Prime folks asked her to take the program, really to audit it. and see if it was something they'd like to offer to their cohorts of students. And so Angela set about it and actually found that it was an insightful experience in understanding the diversity of skills involved in accelerating science from the bench to commercialization. And I can say that since Angela took the course, we have presented it to 2 of their cohorts, and their cohorts are currently also enjoying the program very much. So I think this is a great recommendation from someone that found that it really has helped her in her career. And I do want to, before we start talking about current trends in biotech, I do want to give a shout out to the adMare community. And this is Canada's first and only digital life sciences online community that every one of you here today, we would be very happy to have you sign up and join us. The purpose of it is that you can connect and network, stay up to date with your peers across Canada. You can explore, share and discuss the latest industry news, which is posted on the community every week. Or we do a huge roundup of everything that's happening across Canada. You can expand, broaden and build professional relationships in our community, access professional development, mentorship, and many collaboration opportunities. And I think what's often of most interest is that we have a job board on there with upwards of 200 postings. And I can tell you that all the biotech companies that we know, when they have opportunities, they're posted there. And every opportunity that adMare is posting is posted there first. So it doesn't hurt to sign up. I'm on there daily, and it's really encouraging to me to see our BIS participants connecting with each other. And I'll tell you that when you're looking for your new role, the more people that you know, the more aware you are of where the opportunities are happening around you. So talking about biotech trends and must-haves for career success, I don't have all the answers. And so I think some of the discussion points at the end will be really interesting. And if anyone has anything else to add, let's hear it. Let's make a conversation about this, because everyone's comments are of value. So the current trends, I would say, that I have seen are around artificial intelligence. Before I got involved with the Bioinnovation Scientist Program and supporting some of the curation of it, I was the head of target validation for adMare. And we actually did start to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to accelerate our drug discovery. Pretty much I can tell you that we went from being able to screen maybe 250,000 compounds in a month to being able to screen 1 million in 15 minutes. And so understanding AI and its role currently is something that if you have a mind for it, take a look, because it's very, very interesting. And of course, the other one now is big data and analytics. And, you know, now we've got programs like the personalized oncogenomics program at BC Cancer. When they first started looking at cancer genomes, they may have had data sets of like 1 terabyte. Those days are long gone. They have just they just have an awful lot of data where they start to identify and understand the genetic drivers of various cancers. I think that anyone that is interested in working with large volumes of data, this is an area that I would suggest you look at. I had one postdoc who just was completely fascinated, and what we did is we will actually put people through some additional education at adMare, and we had her learn Python and R, and she now works on the POG program at BC Cancer, where she is the person that's actually analysing the data on the various tumours. Of course, precision medicine is another area that is really growing. And in precision medicine, they treat each patient as a unique individual. And of course, it's those advances in the omics and the data analysis that are enabling them to have new insights into how the human body responds to drugs. And I mean, if you think about it, with our own genomes, every one of us carries at least 3,000 SNPs. And the more we can get to terms with what SNPs matter, what are in we used to think that if a SNP was in a non-coding region, it didn't cause any problems. We find out later on that that's actually not the case. Some of our non-coding genes are even, or non-coding sections are even more important. Formulations, I think, is a very hot area, and I would say that there's going to be huge growth in this. If you take a look at the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, what enabled them to deliver mRNA into the cytoplasm of a cell was the way they were formulated. So they were formulated using liposomal nanoparticles, the development of which was Peter Cullis and his group. Peter Cullis actually was our one of the founders of adMare, formerly known as CDRD. So he actually was my boss for about 5 years. And way back in 2007, all he talked about was, how do you deliver? And you know, for him at that time, how do you deliver nucleic acids that would be involved in gene editing, in immuno-oncology, in the treatment of rare genetic and undruggable diseases? And speaking to him recently, so obviously the mRNA vaccines have been incredibly important, but now they're going back to what they were originally developing them for, which would be vaccines for cancer. So I think there's a lot of excitement in that field. So if anyone is listening that has an interest in formulation of drugs, companies like Precision Nanosystems are building out big time, taking on people, huge numbers of people, because they got a huge sum of money recently from the government to develop manufacturing using these methodologies. So it's definitely worth a look at. And then, of course, cell therapy, novel therapies for all sorts of musculoskeletal diseases, autoimmune, cancer immunotherapy. And all of this, again, comes down to delivery, gene editing, understanding gene editing. I was working on a program with Boehringer Ingelheim, and they said for them now, the gold standard is, if you have a target, no matter what you've shown with that target, you have to show that you can edit it and that the consequences of taking it out are not deleterious to a human. So these are all areas that not necessarily in your PhD studies or your undergrad studies are covered off. So if you think there's something there that would be important for you as you develop your career, I would say while you're in your PhD program, start looking at these areas, select one. There's some really great online programs with MIT and Harvard where you could gather those skills and certifications while you're currently studying. Interestingly, though, we talk about all of this and all of the skills that you need for this. We've talked to a lot of companies, and for them, it's these soft skills that they feel they're most in demand right now. So you understand molecular biology, or you understand big data, or you understand gene editing. But if you can't work in a team, then it's really, really hard for a company. And this was one of the reasons for the Bioinnovation program. We really did a lot of those soft skills. And I know at first when we looked at it, we wondered if the makeup of it should be more technical. But we spoke to people and they said what they actually need are people with problem-solving skills, knowing how to collaborate, knowing how to understand and follow standard operating procedures. So it's really interesting that by taking the Bioinnovation Scientist program, some of the soft skills that are listed here, you'll become an expert in. And that's worth taking note of, I think. that whole question, how do you transition from academia to biotech? And I think if there's one question I'm asked more than any, this really would be it. And I would say that you have to access a good mentor. I sometimes call it a champion. You have to find someone that believes in you and will champion you. And I think finding a mentor that has a good track record of founding companies is a very good way to go. So my background was in infectious diseases. When I came to Canada, I got to know people like Brett Finlay and Bob Hancock, and I knew that they were very involved in developing biotech companies. And that was actually how I got into biotechnology. When they actually co-founded a company together. They knew me, they knew of me, I'd spoken to them enough so that when I applied, I actually was given a scientist position there. So again, it comes from that networking and getting yourself out there and making sure that people know who you are. Networking, staying current, know what the current trends in drug development are. So for instance, the first company that I went into with Bob and Brett, they were looking at immunotherapy, and it was the use of peptides. I had no background in it at all. And so I learned and I read and I studied. And the one thing I can tell you, if you have a PhD, you know how to learn. That's the point of a PhD. What it says is this person knows how to learn, and that's what you have to do. And you know, when you look at current and new current trends in drug development, it's changing all the time. There was no CRISPR when I was first in biotech, but there is now. And so it's something that I've had to make sure I understand because my group were doing CRISPR on a daily basis. So that's one of the things I would suggest, is that access our online digital community so that you know what is actually happening in drug development in Canada. And actually see where your skills are a good fit. So for instance, do you have a record of being a team player? Have you been involved in a project that is, say, has more of an international flair, where you have had to relay your data and communicate your results to a larger team? I think sometimes we undersell ourselves. You may actually have more than you realize. Do you have a record of being a good communicator? You may not know that, but if you've published a paper, then you have a record of being a good communicator because you had to take the data that you had and you had to communicate it in a publication. And I think that that's one of the things I would encourage all of us. You have to learn how to sell yourself and how you may actually have skills that you have not really pushed forward on. And I think that actually, particularly as women, we're sometimes bad at this. And I think it comes from not speaking up and maybe being a little more humble. And I don't mean going out and just being the, constantly bragging about yourself, but know that if you have published a paper, you are a communicator. And when you go for interviews, you can actually point that out. I know how to communicate. I know how to write is another one that's actually, I think, very, very important. So how do you become job ready? I would say if you have a PhD, try and undertake an industrial postdoc. And there's many, many ways you can do that. I would say that the ones that we do at adMare, both in our Montreal site and in Vancouver, they are industrial postdocs. They're accepted as being at an industrial level. But there are also lots of companies that use MyTax and fund their postdocs using the MyTax program. It's worth researching if that's an opportunity that you think that you would fit. Also, I think accessing additional training in the business of biotech, all those current trends. If you're interested in big data, you need to know how to access it. You need to know how to understand it. So maybe start looking at programs like Learning R and learning Python was a big one actually for our group. And then understanding your transferable skills and knowing that you have skills that are incredibly valuable. And sometimes you don't even know that. So for instance, you've written a dissertation if you've done a PhD, which means you're capable of presenting because you've had to do it. You're also capable of organizing large amounts of information in a very clear manner. That is golden for any company. That is absolutely golden. How do I gain industry relevant experience to make myself competitive in the job market? And that's what I'm trying to encourage you to understand, is to stand back and take stock of the skills your bachelor's and your PhD provided you with. The fact that you may have likely published if you've got a PhD, again, that's evidence that you can communicate information to a very broad audience. Link these skills in your interviews so that you can remain aware of the transferable skills you already have. And that's one of the things I think in the Bioinnovation Scientist program, we encourage people to network with each other and be clear of the skills that you've got. And I think that the more you present the fact that you have those skills, the more encouraged you are when you go into a job situation. I don't know about you, but for me, going for interviews was never fun. And you panic and you don't know how to build yourself up, and you want to be honest and very, very clear. I don't want a job that I can't do, but at the same time, I don't want to be turned down for a job that I probably could have done very well. Which brings me on to imposter syndrome. And I'm wondering if there's anyone on here that hasn't heard of imposter syndrome, because most scientists suffer from it. And I will tell you that that negative self-talk, I've talked to so many grad students, undergrads, postdocs, and I find that predominantly it's women are very prone to it. I don't know if that means men don't suffer from it, but my experience is that women in science and technology are particularly known to not believe that they have the skills to do the job that they've been hired to do. I think part of it comes from maybe being a high achiever and a perfectionist makes it more likely. But how do we deal with this? You have to be aware of this voice and you have to refuse to listen to it. And here's one that for me is very big. You have to give yourself permission to fail. And I remember some years ago, CDRD actually had us undergo some life coaching and career coaching that was very, very interesting, because in one of the sessions that I had, the person that was teaching us actually phrased this in a very different way. She said, you have to find a place of forgiveness for yourself. When you've had a bad day and you failed in an experiment, you have to be able to walk away and cut yourself some slack. And I've thought about her so many times, because there's been so many times I've thought, oh man, I got that wrong, or I've made an error there, or I wish I'd said that a little bit better. But you know, as women, we're so hard on ourselves. At some point, you have to stand back and cut yourself a bit of slack. And that's what I mean when I say give yourself permission to fail. And the other one, and I think I would say this particularly when you're in a country that you're not from necessarily. When I first came to Canada, the person that was my boss was from England. And he made a really interesting comment to me that it took me a long time to understand was true. He said, you will find in time that in many ways, the only thing you have in common with Canada is the English language, because it's not a society like the one you came from. And so now you have to learn a whole new world. And I think for me that I'm very grateful that I didn't have to learn a new language, because I'm useless at them. I can't speak French. I've been here 22 years and I still can't have a conversation in French. But one of the things that I have learned is that when you start to worry about these things, you have to know you're here in Canada, you are enough, and indeed you do belong. You belong here and you belong in the career that you have chosen. And it's almost like building up our self-belief. And it's not like, to me, it's actually speaking words of truth over yourself to say, you know, I may have had a bad day, but I am enough and I'm as good as anybody else in what I'm trying to accomplish here. Learn that kindness, give yourself that permission to fail. And so that was my last slide, and I think we've got lots to talk about, and I think we have lots of questions, but I think having some conversations now, especially in the networking, I'm really excited to hear what other people have to say to add to the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Dullaghan. That was like a very packed, a great presentation packed with a lot of very useful information. So right now we're going to head to the questions and answers. Few of the questions were submitted by some of you when you enroll into the program. So we're going to start with them, and then we are going to move into the questions that you submitted on the chat. So Dr. Dullaghan can respond some of them. Also, I want to mention that at the end of a presentation, expect within a couple of days, some summary sheet with some of the resources that Dr. Dullaghan has shared with us. That includes the adMare program information and also information that pertains to the skills that you need to acquire. So, you know, be pending that you will receive an email from us summarizing all these, you know, great information that Dr. Dullaghan has provided to us. So I'm gonna go and ask like one of the questions that summarize some of the, let's say, concerns of some of our attendees. So the first question is, for someone that is just finishing their education, is like an undergrad person or a graduate person that has no work experience, how they can kick off their career in biotech?
That's a really good question. And you know, what I would hope if someone is still going through their undergrad would be go to the co-op office, see if you can actually access a co-op placement. I think the other thing is to go and see if there's any internships available. I really think it's not until you sit at the bench, you find out which part of biotechnology is for you. And the only way to access that is to physically go and do it. And I think that internships, they can be hard to get hold of. I think that one of the other aspects is networking on our community. You will know if there are any internships available. And I think Jen has just put there the Student Biotech Network. That is a great undergrad organization where they try and network right across the country to enable the students to get into biotech. And if anyone else has any other ideas, feel free to share them, but you have to get to the bench. You have to. If you feel that that's where you're headed. If you feel that you're headed into the business side of things, then maybe try accessing an internship in a place like adMare, where we have a whole group of trainees being trained in the business side of biotech.
Pretty good. Thank you for that. So a second question that summarizes also some of the, let's say, concerns of our audience is, what would you advise to somebody that is changing either fields, let's say somebody that is transitioned from a very unrelated field, let's say business or any other field, into biotech, or somebody that is actually transitioning from academia to industry? How is the best approach for that person to be successful in that transition?
I think by connecting with people and actually being honest. So I'll give you an example. A friend of mine recently got a high-level job at UBC, and she connected with me and she said, I'm really quite scared and I don't know whether I'm doing the best job possible, but I really want to do well. And I said, well, talk to the people around you and ask them, Am I doing a good job? How was this done before I came? Could you offer me any advice? And I think the more we learn to talk to each other, and, you know, particularly as women, let's support each other and lift each other up, we're then all going to do well. Do you know what I mean? And she actually went back and connected with some of the people that were now reporting to her and asked them to give her feedback on her transition, because it was a big transition for her. She actually was in the building trade before and doing safety in building. It's very different than to be in a university. She said they had so much great advice for her and support that now she has settled into her role. So again, it's talking. And that's something that I do find our community is great for, when I see people connecting with their fears and saying, you know, has anyone else had this experience? Anyone got any advice for me? What a great place to find an answer.
That's pretty great. So I'm going to pass it on, and thank you for that. I'm going to pass it on to Niraja, who's going to talk about the questions that were asked live. So Niraja.
Hi, Edie, it was a good conversation. I'm thankful to Erin because she picked up most of the questions from the chat. So give me a minute. Yeah, so one of the questions was, is it possible for PhD students outside Canada, neither with Canadian citizen or who is having a PR, to apply for industrial postdoc, to industries postdoc?
I would think anyone that's got a PhD of a postdoc program is advertising. They've got the same rights as everybody else. I came and did a postdoc in Canada. I'd never even been to Canada. I was living in London. So that's one of the great things that the PhD does open up the world to you, is that, for instance, of the postdocs that we've had at adMare, we've had them from Sweden, Scotland, England, Ireland, the US. Yes. If you have a PhD and you're applying for a postdoc, you can apply for any postdoc in any country.
Thank you, Edie. If anybody who has a few more questions, please feel to unmute yourself. We can take 1 or 2 questions before we move to the breakout rooms.
Hi, can I ask one question?
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. First of all, thanks, Dr. Edith, for such an different and I would say a very informative webinar that I have been to. Thank you for answering the last question. I have one more question for you. As someone who has always been in academics, and I only have a less than year of work experience, but I want to transition into industry after my PhD. Do you think it's important that we stick to the technology or the field that we are pursuing in our PhD, or do employers are okay if I say that I'm ready to expand the horizons and I'm ready to dive into new technologies, what the innovations the company is up to? So will the skills that I'm acquiring for my PhD thesis degree, will they limit me in any way?
So that's an excellent question. So if you think about it, I said earlier in my talk that really and truthfully, what a PhD says about you is that you know how to learn. I'll use myself as an example here. All my studies were in infectious diseases. One of the things I really wanted to be involved in was antibiotic development. Well, guess what? No one's doing antibiotic development. But the skills that I learned, I was able to divert into the understanding of how genes work, which is why I ended up as the head of target validation. In target validation, you don't need to know anything about infection. But in infection, you do need to understand some of the genetic drivers of infection, particularly in innate immunity. And so, yeah, I transitioned right out of infectious diseases, which I have to say was very sad to me, that all of pharma has moved away from developing antibiotics, because, to be quite honest, there's no money there. Developing a drug that someone takes for 7 days is never going to pay you back for what you've actually had to invest. And so people have moved away. I just had to then look at what I knew, look at what I understood, look at what I was even interested in. If you don't want to get up and go to work, don't choose a job just because it's available. You're going to be working for a long time. You want to look at what you're doing in your grad studies and think, which part of this is the most interesting to me, and then fully go after it.
Gustavo, you can go ahead. You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, thank you for all the clarifications that you bring on here. Can you listen to me?
Yes,
yes,
listening? I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a master's degree in public health, and I've been here in Toronto for 2.5 years. And I tell you, it's quite difficult to get some good position here, some good job positions, especially in the universities for research assistant, for example. Just because I believe so that my master's degree is not enough for entering either the university as a researcher or the big tech industry. So do you have any approach? Can you bring us any approach for master degrees here, people who have master's degree here in Canada?
I actually think that for an entry-level biotech position, you don't need a PhD, to be quite honest. I think a master's should suit you very, very well. In actual fact, I really like the idea that you did a master's in public health. And it's interesting because I worked with a number of researchers in St. Paul's Hospital, and actually it was the masters in public health that they were really interested in as they are working with patients with COPD. So there are opportunities there. I wonder if you could broaden your network, maybe join our community, talk to people on there and see if they have advice. I'm sure there's people there that have experienced just the same as you. I think you need to broaden your network. There are opportunities for masters. There absolutely are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to end at our live question here because of the time. There were some questions that were responded throughout the speech, and some of the